So I just think it's totally unfair that I'm in a tie and all of you guys are in shorts and t-shirts. That seems, don't usually like it like that. Let's see here. Found this. I'm going to move that. So let me start by saying that when Krista invited me to give this our last lecture, I was honored, I think very honored that she asked. And I was also completely horrified. I've sort of been dreading this idea for a long time now, and when she asked, I was like, good Lord, I don't want to do this. It took me a week to actually reply to her. I think I just let the email sit there for a while and just kept ignoring it, you know. I just leave it there and leave it there and leave it there, and then what I was really hoping for was something like this, sort of a surprise business trip to pop up where I could say, well, I'd really like to do that, but I have to fly to Kathmandu. And I'm sorry that I can't be here for it. And so I need to explain this image a little bit. Since I'm already doing something that makes me uncomfortable, I thought I would also do something else that makes me uncomfortable at the same time. I'm going to illustrate my own talk, which anybody who's been in any of my classes knows that this is really a horrible idea. And I just want everybody else to know that it's really not going to get any better from here, okay? So where was I? After I accepted, I figured I would eventually get some sort of great idea about what to talk to you about. And so this is me basically the week after I accepted this idea. And so I walked around with this sort of giant void in my head thinking, okay, something will come and fill this void eventually. And so then this is the week after that, and I thought, this is not so good. So what I did next was basically think, all right, so I was here and I thought, this isn't working very well, so I better shoot for something slightly less than great, which was I was hoping would fill the void. I crossed off fantastic. I crossed off decent, and I just am shooting for possibly helpful and hopefully not damaging. That's where we're shooting. And oddly enough, that is also my teaching philosophy, so we're all in a good place. So the problem with this is that normally I talk about things that I actually know about. I usually teach heat transfer, I teach numerical methods, and I know stuff about that. I'm usually, at least I know stuff. I'm not always super prepared, as the students will tell you, but I do know things. So today I'm going to sort of not do that, and I'm going to lecture on something which I'm completely not an expert on. And I'm also basically completely unqualified to discuss. So that's where we're going. And so the possibly helpful goal of this talk is probably, there's a slim chance that I actually make that, but we'll see where we get. So what am I going to talk about? Today I'm going to tell you what I know about people. So coming from an engineering background, you should realize that I have absolutely no formal training in this whatsoever. I'm also hoping that there's no psychology majors here. I'm generally hoping that there's really no people that know things in general here, is really what I'm hoping. And so this is the situation we're heading for right here. Okay, so what do I want to tell you about people? First of all, when I teach, I try to teach useful things. That's at least what I tell myself. So, you know, if there's anybody here from finite elements, anybody here from CFD, anybody here from, what else do I teach? Oh, finite elements, I said that, heat transfer. I would just prefer that you not comment on the usefulness at this point. We'll just kind of keep this a non-audience participation skit and go from there. So the idea here is to try to tell you something useful about people. And so I'm going to do this in two parts. And so the first part is how to influence people. So far this is a useful topic and we're off to a good start. Unfortunately, I can only tell you about this by negative examples. So I'm going to change the topic to how to not influence people. And we'll see where we go from there. All right. So where do I start? I'm going to talk about Monopoly. So growing up, I liked playing Monopoly. I still like playing Monopoly. And when I was a kid, I played a lot with my father and my dad, who I think were completely merciless. And I lost a lot, basically because I think I was incredibly unlucky for my entire childhood. And I also think it's because my brother always got to be the dog and I always had to be the thimble. So, all right. So now talking about Monopoly and sort of this whole history of Monopoly for me, you might think that I'm hyper-competitive about Monopoly, and that is in fact false. And if anybody wants to play, we can certainly do that later. All right. When I was in college, I went home for the summer, and my friends used to play Monopoly together. And so we had a sort of a big game going. There was 6 of us in the game. And my friend Bill got what I call a natural Monopoly, which means that you go around and you... Everybody's played Monopoly? Yes? Okay. So a natural Monopoly was what I call when someone lands on 3 of the same color and buys them all and doesn't have to trade for anybody. And so the rest of us, who are sort of here, that's me, had nothing. And it was kind of a weird game because not only did we have nothing, we couldn't trade with anybody. Like, all of the remaining parts of us had no 2 pairs of people could trade, no 3 pairs of people could trade. There was really nothing we could trade to sort of make monopolies. And so we were all kind of stuck. And Bill was all sort of smug and happy. If you know Bill, you would know exactly what I'm talking about here. And so then after that, I kind of came up with this, what I consider to be the most brilliant, fantastic idea ever. So I came up with this like incredibly complicated idea where everybody traded everything, and in the end, we all ended up with 1 monopoly. And so I was even magnanimous enough to sort of say, I don't care which monopoly I'll get, just we'll trade them all, and we'll all have a monopoly, and we'll have a chance to win. So I really thought this was like completely brilliant. I was very proud of myself, and I told everyone so. And I was just super proud of myself. So after that, no one wanted my idea. In fact, completely everyone just, they didn't even discuss it. It was just like immediately tossed. And so we all basically played the game, and built hotels and destroyed us all. So this is my example of how not to influence people. And I thought, okay, let's see where we are now. Okay. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yes, okay, so what can we learn from this example? I think what we can learn from this example is the following. My friends are all idiots. That's probably what I thought I would learn from the first thing, but unfortunately this doesn't seem to help the problem. I've had many other situations where I've been completely unable to influence people, and so I've also tried other strategies. In fact, I've even tried this on my heat transfer class where I just tell people, you know, I am usually right all the time. There's a few cases where I'm not right. You should just listen to me. And that also does not work at all. No one ever listens to me. So I sort of thought about this for a while and said, okay, what is going on here? So I kind of reasoned this through, and I, you know, was a logical person, so okay, I went through, you know, maybe people are all just idiots. It's possible. Maybe people are all just illogical. It's also possible. But the thing is most of the people that I was interacting with didn't seem like idiots and didn't seem illogical. And so I thought, something else is going on. And so the conclusion I came to is that people make decisions based on trust. It's not all logic, right? It's about trust. So even a small game like, so let's go one more here. In a game of Monopoly, you might imagine that after playing with my friends for a long time, they completely didn't trust me. Yes, I'm not a trustworthy person in Monopoly. So when I came up with this idea, no one trusted me. And I think that's sort of an important lesson to learn is when you go through life and you're thinking about these things, trust is a huge part of convincing people to do things. So, for instance, you know, in your job, if you have some great idea, it might seem blatantly obvious to you, but it may not be obvious to other people. Even Monopoly, which is a fairly simple game, is not obvious. So building trust is a huge part of what you guys need to do as you get out of here, and there's no simple way to do that. I sort of have this picture is for complicated stuff, like in politics, for instance. We have Republicans, Democrats. There's so much disagreement in what's going on. And how is that possible? We all get the same news. We all think about the same things. We're all fairly logical people. But in the end, it's because we all have different backgrounds and we learn to trust different things. So it's the trust part of it that is important. And a little bit more about trust. Trust is a little bit like a house of cards. When you build up trust, basically, you have to do it over a long period of time and very carefully. And if you don't do that, just one sort of false move and the whole thing falls down. So this career that you guys are going out of here to do, you should think about that as you interact with people. It's not a tricky thing, it's a simple thing, but it takes effort and it takes time. You should be patient and you should work at it. All right, so this is the last example. This is an example about my father, and this is an example from my childhood that I remember. My father actually was a salesman for a while, and oddly enough, he sold heat transfer equipment. So that seems a little weird, but yes, it's true. And he told me a story once about how he went to see the same guy at Ingersoll Rand 7 times, and 7 times in a row he got rejected. So first of all, I don't think I could even do that. Get rejected 7 times in a row. That's a lot of rejection. And the second thing has happened, he said on the 7th time, the guy asked him for how to size a heat exchanger, which is even weirder. Yes, I know a heat transfer, my dad, whatever, I won't even go there. And so my dad made him a chart about how to size heat exchangers, and that started the trust. And after that, actually, the 8th time, he started to make sales, and that's basically the trust part of the relationship, which is a huge part of it. Okay, that's that. So this is part 2, how to understand people. So the first thing is just how to convince people to do things. This part is about how to understand people. Now, I think we can all agree that people are sort of egotistical. Like I'm standing here, and to me, you guys are just bunches of eyes, probably computer controlled for all I know. And I am the most important part of this picture, right? And so, I have to go back one. Okay, so why is it important to know that people are egotistical? That's the question, and that's the question you might be asking yourselves. But oddly enough, that's exactly the wrong question. The right question is, why is it important to know that I am egotistical? We are all egotistical people, and it's the me of the egotistical that's important. So when I say things like people are illogical, all of you agree with me, but no one thinks I am illogical. When I think people are idiots, everybody agrees with me, but no one thinks I am an idiot, right? Everyone else is an idiot. I am not, right? And that's sort of what being egotistical is all about. So here's some examples of this in action. And I think really this talk is mostly about an excuse for me to tell this story. So I'm a big Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan. Douglas Adams is great. So he's awesome at sort of making fun of humans, which I think is hilarious. And one of my favorite stories is in the book, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. And so I'm going to tell that story. And in fact, when I started researching this thing, I realized that that story is actually based on something that happened to Douglas Adams. So I'm going to tell you the true version of this story. So I just printed it here, and I'll read it to you as I go. So this is Douglas Adams talking. This actually did happen to a real person, and the real person is me. I had gone to catch a train. This was April 1976 in Cambridge, UK. I was a bit early for the train. I'd gotten the time of the train wrong. I went to get myself a newspaper to do the crossword and a cup of coffee and a packet of cookies. Oops, a newspaper to do the crossword, a cup of coffee, and a packet of cookies. I went and sat at a table. I want you to picture the scene. It's very important that you get this clear in your mind. Here's the table, newspaper, cup of coffee, packet of cookies. There's a guy sitting opposite me, perfectly ordinary looking guy, wearing a business suit, carrying a briefcase. It didn't look like he was going to do anything weird. What he did was this. He suddenly leaned across, picked up the packet of cookies, tore it open, took one out, and ate it. Now this, I have to say, is the sort of thing the British are very bad at dealing with. There's nothing in our background, upbringing, or education that teaches you how to deal with someone who in broad daylight has just stolen your cookies. You know what would happen if this had been South Central Los Angeles? There would have very quickly been gunfire, helicopters coming in, CNN, you know. But in the end, I did what any red-blooded Englishman would do. I ignored it. And I stared at the newspaper, took a sip of coffee, tried to do a clue in the newspaper, couldn't do anything, and thought, what am I going to do? In the end, I thought, nothing for it, I'll just have to go for it, and I tried very hard not to notice the fact that the packet was already mysteriously opened. I took out a cookie for myself. I thought that settled him, but it hadn't, because a moment or two later, he did it again. He took another cookie. Having not mentioned it the first time, it was somehow even harder to raise the subject the second time around. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice, it really doesn't work. We went through this whole packet like this. When I say the whole packet, I mean there were only about 8 cookies, but it felt like a lifetime. He took one, I took one, he took one, I took one. Finally, when we got to the end, he stood up and walked away. Well, we exchanged meaningful looks. Then he walked away, and I breathed a sigh of relief and sat back. A moment or two later, the train was coming in, so I tossed back the rest of my coffee, stood up, picked up the newspaper, and underneath the newspaper were my cookies. The thing I like particularly about this story is the sensation that somewhere in England there has been wandering around for the last quarter century a perfectly ordinary guy who's had the same exact story, only he doesn't have the punchline. I love that story. It just kills me. But the thing about that story is it shows sort of that egotistical thing. We always think the other person is wrong, and we never think we're wrong. It's just sort of the assumption. And Adams is great at sort of pointing that out to us. In his books, I think the humans are the third smartest behind mice and dolphins. And on top of that, our ancestors are basically phone disinfectants. That's who settled the planet, and we're just ancestors from them. So, he's constantly sort of rubbing our nose in our pride about being, the best, basically. So about egotism and about sort of thinking it like that. So how do we avoid being egotistical? So the way to do that is humility. Always assume that if I were in that person's situation, I would probably make the same mistakes. This is the first step to understanding why people do the things they do. So this fundamental assumption will take you a long way sort of towards understanding people, but also seeing things in people that you might have missed. So it's sort of my fundamental belief as a teacher is that, you guys do stupid stuff, but I would do stupid stuff too, right? When I see you guys do stupid stuff, I think, for whatever reason, I would probably end up doing that. And that's an important thing to think about when you're interacting with people. This is sort of an example from a teacher perspective. We violate this rule all the time about sort of thinking about, why do students do the things they do. So we get emails from students, especially freshmen, that say things like this. Brian, you are my advisor. We need to meet for my advising appointment. Where is your office? Generally sort of with no punctuation, no capitalization. And I think, And so often when we get these kinds of things, our first impulse is to do something like this. Herr von Freshman, please try looking where you found the email address, my email address. You might find my office number too, right? But in fact, that's not really a good idea. And so a different response would be something like this. Actually, this is my standard response to these kinds of things. Dear Mr. Freshman, some helpful hints for future professional emails. If you're emailing someone you don't know well, you probably didn't realize there's this many rules in emailing, but I've actually made these all up. You should probably use their last name, Dr. Helenbrook or Professor Helenbrook. If that person replies with a signature using their first name, then you can use their first name in the next correspondence. Also, if you want to make a good impression, do a little background work before sending something. My office is listed in the campus directory. What you really need to know is my office hours. Lastly, professional emails should be punctuated properly and be formatted like a letter, sort of like below, right? So I send that out, and I think, okay, I hope they're not too annoyed by this. But almost universally, I get the following response. Thank you. Which totally blew me away when I did this first. It was like, this kid that I was like totally annoyed at is actually a completely nice kid who doesn't know how to write an email. All he needs is someone to tell him how to write an email. Like, now I feel like the idiot, right? And so it's an important thing to remember is this sort of idea of, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And, actually, like, I'm also a pilot. There's an entire chapter in the FAA sort of aircraft information manual about this egotistical phenomenon because it gets pilots in so much trouble. The idea that, oh, that won't happen to me, that'll happen to somebody else. So when you're interacting with people, your first assumption should always be, if I was in that situation, I would be doing the same exact thing. So sort of to summarize, there's really no tricks or tips to dealing with people. They're all different, they're all complicated. The things that I know is to influence people, you should earn their trust. And to understand people, just put yourself in their position and assume that you would be doing exactly what they would be doing. All right, so that's it. So long, thank you. I do want to say thank you for inviting me to do this. I also want to say thank you to my heat transfer class because I had so much fun sort of teaching heat transfer last semester. It was great, and I wish you guys all the best of luck.